again, welcome. This is a big treat tonight. We have these four people four couples who volunteered. So it's not an easy thing to do, and we have some folks here who've done it before, like Karen and Joe back here, and it's not an easy thing to just disclose all these family secrets. But I think tonight we'll have a really good time, and I thank you all for coming as well. So we'll not have any more introductions. The names and all will be on the screen, so that you'll be able to see who they are and so forth. But in essence of time, we'll just let them carry on. So anyway, enjoy, and thank you again, all of you. So we have Cozette and John Jacobs, we have Mark and Christine Hickey, and we have Claude and Deborah, and then Jean and Dave Peck. So
it's my brother, that was good.
I know, a little wine and it goes a long way. I know. Anyway, so enjoy. Thank you for coming.
We're not going to tell family secrets. I can't see you over there.
Too far apart.
They're playing our song.
Is that song? That's so cool.
Oh.
Yeah, that's us another lifetime ago. Well, Cozette was our romance, was it fate? Maybe it was meant to be. It must have been because I was on an island out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, I was way up in the Appalachian Mountains. Is it not?
You saw the Great Green Mountains. There you go.
There you go. Did you hear me? I was way up in the mountains. It was in the community.
Yeah, we didn't know each other. See, I dropped out of college when I was a teenager. I won't get into that story. I enlisted in the Coast Guard, and I'd been in the Coast Guard for 4 years. I was about ready to get out, and I was stationed in Bermuda. But my enlistment was almost up.
Well, I was following my dreams to become a nurse. I was at a nursing school in South Carolina. It was affiliated with Furman University. And to tell you the truth, we had no shortage of boys. We had Clemson University that had just become a co-ed school a few years before. We had Donaldson Air Force Base, we had interns in the hospital.
You didn't tell me about that. We had girls in Bermuda too. You know?
Well, we were actually on an affiliation at a VA hospital. It was a beautiful place. Have you ever heard of Otine, North Carolina? It was a suburb of Asheville. And gosh, we had beautiful scenery, great food. It was pretty easy work being on a long-term illness ward. But there were no boys.
No boys.
No boys.
Well,
I was assigned.
I was in Bermuda. I was in the Coast Guard. I was trying to get out to go back to college. I found out there was a way you could get out. You could get an early discharge if you wanted to start college. So I got my mother to help me, and I got accepted in the University of North Carolina, Asheville. And I went in and I filled out all the paperwork and I asked for an early discharge. Go ahead, Cozette.
Okay, I was assigned to the Dr. Jacobs ward. the nurses before me had warned us of the doctors. And they said, well, you know, Dr. Candler, he'll take you horseback riding. And Dr. Sanders, oh, he was the coolest dresser. Dr. Jacobs, well, he's probably the smartest doctor in the hospital, but he's a little bit harder to talk to. But just ask him about his family, ask him about his boys. So.
Well, I had turned in my application to get out early, and nothing happened. And so I went over to the office at the Coast Guard base there and talked to the lieutenant. I asked him about my discharge, and he looked at me. It's kind of strange for him to do this, but he said, I'm in charge of the bond drive, and you have taken out a bond. I said, I'd love to take out a bond. So I went back a week or so later and asked about it. And he told me, he said, I gave it to the captain, the base commander. He said he can't afford to let you go and he's not going to send it in. And I actually took that as a compliment that he couldn't afford to let me go, but it was a kind of disappointing compliment. So anyway, I called my mother and told her it didn't look like I was going to get there in time to go back to school.
Well, I was leaving O-Team, returning to Greenville, and I was actually looking forward to having boys around. So I had not met John at that time.
You know, I was looking at our story we got written down here,
Yeah.
and it's not going to work. Well, you're leaving in November. I'm not going to get home until January.
Oh, no. So I'm stuck in the mountains.
Right.
Well, what's going to happen?
I did call my mother and told her I was disappointed, and as usual, bless her heart,
You call your mom.
I called my mom. She was a lady that didn't take things easily, and so she called her brother. And her brother was superintendent of schools in Cozette County. That's one of the maritime counties in North Carolina. And her brother, my Uncle Sully, called his friend Herb. Now, Herb was actually Congressman Herbert Bonner, who was in charge of Coast Guard appropriations. And if you ever went down the Outer Banks, you crossed the Herb Bonner Bridge, if you ever been there. So, needless to say, they got a message in Bermuda that said, "Where is John Jacobs' request for early out?" A couple of days later, the captain called me in his office and he said, "I sent your application and disapproved. It came back approved. And I don't know who you know, but you're getting your early out." And so I was going to get home at the end of October.
And I was going back to Greenville in 3 days.
Well, I just got home, and my father gave me a telephone number. He said, "There's some student nurses at the nurses' residence. Call this number, maybe you can get yourself a date." So I called the number.
And I heard whoever answered the phone holler, "Cozette!" So I was really excited to have a date.
Well, I did. I called the number. I got a date with this girl with a sexy French name. So I went to pick her up, and I drove my Corvette up to the nurse's residence. I mean a Corvair, not a Corvette. So, 1960 Corvair, it's still around. So I went in and picked up this sexy girl with the French name, I was pleasantly surprised. She had auburn hair and brown eyes. She was really cute. And as I walked her out to the car, I heard this singing from up above. You know, what was that?
It was all my classmates. I was going out with the doctor's son. And they were all singing, John Jacobs to And I just said, oh no. And, but I was pleasantly surprised with John. He had that Bermuda tan, and he was wearing a mattress shirt.
Well, I realized that the singing wasn't the angels, you know, of mine, but, and it was kind of funny, but I didn't want to laugh out loud. I was afraid I would embarrass her. But anyhow, I did manage to point out that my Corvair, had a seatbelt in the middle of the front seat. And she gladly slid right over. Cozette, you attacked me.
I used my seatbelt.
Well, at any rate, let's see, where am I here? We had a great time. We went out, we enjoyed each other. We ended up at a drive-in restaurant. You remember the drive-in restaurants where everybody in the hot rods goes around, and my Corvair fit right in. And so we were talking and just enjoying the evening, and all of a sudden I realized that the restaurant had closed and they were sweeping up the parking lot. And I looked at my watch, and my watch had stopped.
A true story. No kidding, his block. I had a curfew. If I'd been in Greenville, I probably would never become a nurse. I mean, I'd been kicked out of school. But we were on affiliation, and they actually knew his dad, and I got by. I just had a note to go by the house mother's room and let her know that I was in, and that's all she said. I knocked on the door. I said, this is Cozette. And John's watch stopped. And she said, okay, I just wanted to know you were in. And that's all she ever said.
Well, I was concerned that I had really spoiled her life, but I was really hoping she would make our date for the next evening.
Yeah, you were supposed to take me out to dinner.
Well, I did. I took you to my mother's house. You can't find better food than my mother's cooking.
He had been away from his mom's cooking, and he just couldn't resist. So we went to his mom's house. Of course, that was Dr. Jacobs that I was supposed to get my exit interview from the next day.
So did you get your interview the next day? Was he nice to you?
Well, we didn't know that he had come to his office early that day. So me and the other two nurses were standing outside, and they were giving me a hard time from going out with you the night before. So they were calling Dr. Jacobs, Daddy Jake. So we didn't realize it, but he opened the door, and there he was. He heard everything. And then I had to go in and sit for an interview.
To tell you the truth, he probably got a big charge out of it.
I was going back to Greenville the next day. John said, well, he might come down because if he was ever in the area, he'd look me up.
Did I do that? So, anyway, it's a long trip down from Asheville to Greenville. There were no interstates back then. If you've ever driven the Kirby Road down the mountain from Asheville, you know it's a long trip. And I told her
But John,
I would look her up one of these days, right?
you knew another group of nurses were coming in.
Well, I'm not sure if it was love at first sight, but in actuality, I just couldn't get her out of her mind. That sexy little girl with the French name, brown eyes and auburn hair. So the next week I called her.
And it was the answer to my prayers. I didn't know if I'd ever hear from him. And so we had one phone, and every time the phone rang, every one of us on the floor would call, listen for our name. And I got the call, and they said, Cozette. I said, yes.
Well,
And it was absolutely the answer to my prayers.
well, I was in school in UNCA. I didn't have any money. It was a long, curvy road from Nashville down to Greenville. But I made the trip. And I made the trip almost every weekend. And we took frequent trips to Paris. Oh, that's Paris Mountain State Park. And not having any money, I always brought a picnic so that I wouldn't have to buy
True story.
dinner. And so just every weekend, just about, I was going to Greenville.
And in March,
Well, in March,
I got a ring.
I bought a diamond. I went down to the nurses' residence. They had this beautiful welcoming area where meeting nurses. It had Victorian sofas and chandeliers, and the furniture was arranged so you had private areas. And I took her into this area, and I actually got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. What did you say?
I'll go through. Of course, I said yes. And we went out that night, and they played Misty.
You heard Misty on that's our song, Misty.
And so that became our song.
And we got married that fall. It's our song, we even named ourselves Misty when we came up here. And when I got in March, when I asked her to marry me, that would have been 60 years ago. And we're still in love.
And our romance continues.
And Cozette, when I sit next to you and I put my arm around you, I get the same feeling that I got in my Corvette when you sleep.
And our romance continues.
Thank you all.